Right, thank you everybody. You haven't seen much of me today, have you? Okay, so this is it. This is the DFL. And it's one of those titles that I came up with almost as a joke and thought I wouldn't get away with. And then miraculously, either they didn't notice, or all I can say is more likely Christabel at LUP, and hello to her as well, has a good sense of humour and actually did allow me to call this down from London. So it's in the library. You can go and read it for yourselves. Many of you have been subjected to various versions of it. And looking around the room, I can see people who have had to put up with me talking about it in their PhD supervisions and pretending it had something to do with the Arctic. It's been introduced in Victorian seminars on completely different topics over a number of tea breaks and in a few late night emails as well. So thank you very much, everybody who's put up with all of that. And I will just, from my acknowledgements, not to be invidious, but because this is the Kent Maps Symposium, I just want to read a very heartfelt couple of acknowledgements. There are various people here who are mentioned, but as this is the Kent Maps Symposium, I just want to read you this little bit about that, because the book was basically finished when we launched Kent Maps, but Kent Maps came very largely, my early bits of Kent Maps came largely out of the book, and it's a sort of complex relationship. The book that I've been working on for the last few years very much comes out of Kent Maps, and so there is a sort of ongoing relationship there. And as I was doing final revisions and proofreading, I was aware that I was drawing on things I had learnt from working with the Kent Maps people. So thank you to all of you. So what I say here, and I stand by it, my thanks to all the Kent Maps online contributors who continue to shape my thinking about the relationship between readers, writers, and their environment. Foremost among them, Michelle Crowther, who presumably needs no sleep, and our partners at JSTOR Labs. My ability to visualize anything is somewhat impaired, but it was Ron Snyder who made me realize that if I couldn't see what I meant myself, then neither would anyone else. And I thought it might be useful because I know we have a diverse group of people in there. I mean, diverse in the sense that most of us are academics or involved in scholarly enterprises, but diverse in terms of career stages and interests, group of people. I thought it might be interesting to talk a little bit. I mean, I will talk a bit about what's in the book, but talk a bit about the writing of the book, because you can go and read it for yourselves. So I came across this the other day that I had written in 2018 for the ICVWW newsletter. And for anybody who's not a sort of crossover, ICVWW is the International Centre for Victorian Women Writers. And we have a newsletter that goes out 3 times a year, in which we have, we haven't had this feature recently, but we did have a regular feature on work in progress. And I came across this and I sort of half smiled and half shuddered, remembering the start of this project, where I talk about standing in Margate Library. And in those days in Margate Library, any of you who know it will know it's got the most beautiful assortment of archives and guidebooks and bits and pieces and illegible stuff and boxes of things nobody quite knows what they are, but aren't they wonderful? And in those lovely days, and I don't know how I'd have got the book written without this, in those days you didn't, and it was totally, it's much better now, but it's much less helpful in a sense. In those days, you could literally just go up to a cupboard and say, can I take out some stuff? And the librarian would say, yeah, that's fine, I'll be over here. Photocopy it? Yeah, whatever. I'll be downstairs, come and get me if you need me. And they have a much stricter system now, which I know is a much better system, but my goodness, it was helpful, because when I first went in there, I knew I wanted to work on Kent archives, and the whole book isn't about Kent, but 2 chapters of it are. And I knew from Alison Hunt, who works very closely with me at ICVWW and with Susan and with Michelle. And I knew that they had really wonderful archive stuff there because she was the driving force behind our Women at the Seaside exhibition in 2014 that first gave me that little glint in the eye for this book. And she said there is just, so much wonderful uncatalogued material down there and nobody's using it, and it's, maybe at risk because it's not catalogued, and in those days, because it was very accessible, there was the odd, rather painful story about people coming out rather fatter than they'd come in an hour earlier. And so I went, and it's an absolutely true story. But I say I have a recurring dream, and it wasn't a dream. I'm standing in front of a locked bookcase, looking at row upon row of tightly packed volumes. Some are weighty looking tomes, others look more like hardback leaflets. I know some of them are vital to my research, but I don't know which ones or why. The titles are so faded I can't read them. And the librarian asks me again which one I want to see. And that episode ended with the librarian saying, "What is it you're looking for?" And me saying brightly, "I don't know, but I'll know it when I see it." At which point he just shook his head sadly, opened a cupboard and said, "Look, I'll be over here, do what you want." And then it gets worse. This time there are at least half a dozen bookcases, and they're all huge. There are also labelled boxes of ephemera and cabinets containing microfilm. I'm standing with a different librarian who is asking me about my research. What is it precisely I'm looking for? This is the librarian who tries to make it, or tries not to make it obvious, he thinks I'm an idiot, and slightly failed, understandably. Again, the picture changes. I'm sitting at a desk confronted by a pile of 19th century library catalogues. In this dream, I am haunted by librarians. They stand in a corner and whisper. It took them hours to find some of this material, and I haven't the faintest idea what I'm going to do with it. My laptop is on the blink, and my parking's about to run out. I write something in pencil, flick through a few pages, and mutter something about coming back next week. Thank you very much to David from Folkestone Library, who's been putting up with me ever since. I've sometimes felt that he turns a little bit pale now when he sees me coming, but he is the only person probably in Kent who would have been able to find those library catalogues. And rather splendidly, thank goodness we were just out of lockdown, literally a week before I was about to send in the final revisions for this book, sent me an email and said, I don't know really to this day, was it kindness or revenge? Said, "Oh, you might like to know I've just found 40 years worth of library reports. Do you want to come in and have a look?" Yeah, the next 5 minutes of my life is a bit of a blur, and I think it's probably best left as a blur, but wow, amazing stuff. But I think, and I was talking to a PhD student about this yesterday, that when you read a book that is finished and published and, looks a little bit like this, hopefully it all seems cohesive and obvious and simple and, well, of course this means that, and of course it's like that, because what else would it be? And I was saying to this student, yeah, but, a book does not get out of bed looking like that. And this particular student and I have a test of how good a job I'm doing as a supervisor, that after an hour with me, if she can stand up and not want to fall over again, she needs to sit back down and I need to make her head spin slightly more. Whereas if she just makes it outside the door and then thinks she's about to faint on the floor, probably, I should start doing risk assessments, probably I've been providing the right level of intellectual stimulation. But my point is that the research process, as well as being thrilling and exciting and fun, I think certainly for me, can also be sometimes overwhelming and intimidating. And I remember that moment so well. It was true about the parking running out, sitting there with all these library catalogues, thinking I'm sitting on a gold mine. I have got all these Folkestone Library catalogues with all this stuff in, and you can see who was there and what's being thrown out and who the librarian is. This is a treasure trove. I don't think anybody's asked to see it in a century. One of the pages is literally uncut, and I don't know what to do with it. I can't just write out everything that's in here. I can't even photograph all of it. What am I meant to do with it? I have absolutely no helpful advice on how you get past that dilemma. If anybody's got a quick fix, you come and tell me. All I'm going to say is I'm in good company, because H.G. Wells's Kipps also got a little bit stuck in the library, and that was just trying to manage the indicator, which was before the days of open access. The indicator was a bit of kit that sat behind the librarian's desk and told you whether a book that you wanted was on loan to someone else or being used or was not being used. And they had a series of little shutters. You can see there, there's actually the in-out. So he's, forgive me the phonetic speech, I was just having a look at this indicator. First class idea, tells you all you want to know. Poor Kipps is absolutely overwhelmed by this indicator. And a lot of that is to do with this, how libraries operate as a cultural space, if you like, because it's behind the librarian's head. Now, I'm sure we all have books that we wouldn't want to go to Michelle and ask to take out of the library, because she's quite scary, as we all know. Open access, it's like Amazon, isn't it? You know, you can get that, whatever it is, and no one needs to know. But when you have to go and ask a librarian to give it to you, yeah, you know, it's a little bit scary. So there's a lot of ideological work that goes on in libraries, by which I became strangely and geekily fascinated while I was writing this. I love this. Can I say, this is something else that I became really interested in, is Seaside ephemera and guidebooks. So, some of the guidebooks actually do it. It's true what they tell in the secondary sources. Some of the guidebooks will begin by telling you what the death rate for the elderly population is in a given resort, as a way to entice you there because it's so healthy. So you know, you can laugh at Stannard. But some of them are really quite jolly. So you can see that that young woman on the left is, you know, no better than she ought to be, because not only is she wearing red stockings, but she's sort of showing a little bit of them. You know, that's got to be a good few inches of ankle that she's indecorously displaying on the beach there. While, please note, pretending to read a book. This is the 19th century equivalent of sitting there on your phone in one of my seminars saying, oh, but I was making notes, Gov. Yeah, right. So she's not reading that book at all. She's admiring her own ankles, as is the man behind her, looking like a bit apart from Three Men in a Boat. Notice the rather loud chest outfit he's got there. He's obviously the kind of like the dish that she's going to have the holiday romance with. So it's not just books about Seaside that can tell us an awful lot. It's guidebooks, it's ephemera, it's library catalogues. And all of these things, as I say, can be quite hard to know what to do with. It's hard to know how to piece them together. So my solution to that problem, I suppose, was largely to, if you don't know something yourself, go to somebody who does. I've survived almost 50 years working on that principle, and let me tell you, it's a good one. So the work I was doing here was quite interdisciplinary by its nature. And one of the ways out of my dilemma was to think, well, okay, maybe I don't know a lot about the history of libraries, but actually there's a whole body of work I didn't know existed, because guess what? I hadn't worked on history of libraries, but other people have, and there it is. And to put it together with, in this case, maybe histories of tourism, obviously, literary criticism, because that's what I do, and to see the kinds of connections that you can make when you put these different approaches together, because some of them are really overlapping, and many of them can be. Yeah. So to get to the real purpose of the book launch, other than to, guess what, launch the book, I accumulated in the course of doing this research quite a number of books about Kent, some of them really excellent, some of them pretty awful, to be honest. Some of these are really quite rare, and the one on the left is not part of this donation, that's not mine. That I don't actually have the Margate murder mystery. The other two there, Maggie of Margate and Love in a Mist, are my copies. So I've acquired, you can see down there, a selection of books about Kent, some of which I really don't know why they're not in print. And many of you will have heard me talk about Love in a Mist in particular, because despite being called Love in a Mist, it's actually quite a probing analysis of what it means for this young woman to be married to somebody who's shell-shocked, and what the reality of that is, not in 1918, but say, a few years later in the early 1920s, when you're still living with somebody who is still suffering from shell shock, and all your feeling of altruism and heroic self-sacrifice has started to wear a bit thin, because actually he's an exceptionally irritating man, and your time isn't your own ever, any moment in the day. It's a very, very honest appraisal of what that might feel like. And the only copies that I know about, so it's in the British Library. I think there is a copy in Margate Library, which is now safely under lock and key. And the only other copy that I was able really to source anywhere is on that table there. And I would really like other people to love these books as much as I do, and in some cases to enjoy these books the way I have, because some of them aren't very good, they're just interesting because they're about Kent. But Love in a Mist, I think, is one of the ones in particular I absolutely hugely enjoyed. Maggie of Margate, that's a paperback edition of a 1912 novel. Again, it was only when I was unable to obtain the hardback anywhere when I was looking for it, and finally, I've been looking for about 3-4 years. Finally, the other day, came across that very ropey looking paperback on the table there. I didn't know there was a paperback until then. So again, the book history element of this has been really, really exciting to get more into. And I've really enjoyed, I think, actually perversely realizing how little I know about book history, having spent the last X years starting to research it and get to know how it works. It's a whole field that you could spend the rest of your life realizing how little you know about, but it's absolutely fascinating. So I have down there A Girl of Thanet. There's some of these are paperbacks. That's the British Library edition of Calamity in Kent. Stealthy Terror is a war novel with partly a Folkestone setting. The Passenger to Folkestone is quite a good crime novel. And my point is, I've used all of these in writing this book, and I couldn't have written this book if I hadn't had access to some books that are now, in some cases, very difficult, even harder than it was for me to pin down. So what I want to do is to donate these books to the library, to our special connections. Always working on that special connection. I'm donating them to the library special collections, really because I want people to use them, I want people to read them, and as part of our commitment as the Kent Maps team and in collaboration with the Centre for Kent History and Heritage, to creating a really good experience for our students, for library users, for us as a university, and just to remind ourselves and everybody else that we live in a really endlessly fascinating place that is full of heritage that we do want to preserve. And we don't just want to preserve it in Aspic somehow or in Carolyn's house. We want to preserve it in a way that benefits everybody. So I want these books to be somewhere where they will be looked after and where they will be used, so that hopefully if you get as interested as I do, somebody is as interested as I am in this aspect of Kent's heritage, they can go and do all the things that I ran out of time to do or just didn't do. So on that note, I'm just going to say that, thank you everybody for listening, and do after this please put what time remains, and I'm happy to take any questions. After that, to go and have a look at the books. Please do take a selfie with the books and put it on Twitter. We're all about self-promotion.